I've tried to let it go, but I can't seem to shake it. The memories slip through my mind like water, and I can't hold on to them. They keep telling me it wasn't real, that it was all in my head. But I know what happened. I have to tell someone before I forget it all again. It's still clear in my mind, so I'll share it all now. I'll post more to finish telling my story, but I had to split it up to make sure I capture everything. Please, if anyone else has been close to death, have you ever ended up in a place like this? I woke up with a jolt, shooting straight up in bed, gasping for breath like I had just come up from underwater. My chest was tight, and I grabbed the soft sheets beneath me, so smooth, softer than anything I'd ever felt before. My head was spinning. A fresh pine scent filled the air, carried by a cool breeze that fluttered the white curtains. Sunlight poured in, spilling across the wooden walls and filling the room with warmth. I sat there, frozen, trying to make sense of what was going on. The ship. The storm. Claire. Wyatt. Farron. Was I dead? Then I heard the door creak open, and I turned my head quickly. A man stepped in, moving calmly. He looked kind, but I didn't recognize him. His hair was dark, with streaks of gray at the temples, and his face was lined with deep wrinkles, but his smile was warm. His bright blue eyes shone as he spoke. "Good morning, Elliot," he said, crossing the room and sitting down on the bed beside me. His hand reached out to gently rub my back, the way a father might comfort a troubled child. I pulled away in shock. "Who are you?" My voice was rough, like I hadn't used it in ages. "How do you know my name?" He laughed softly, a friendly sound. "I'm your father." "Why wouldn't I know your name?" "My father?" "No. That didn't make sense. My father worked on a ship. He smelled like salt and oil, not chocolate." "Father?" I whispered, almost afraid to say it. "What's going on? What is this? Am I dead? Are you God?" He chuckled again, lighthearted but dismissive, like he was brushing off something trivial. "That dream really got to you, didn't it?" He patted my shoulder. "Come on now, let's get you something to eat. Your mom's making French toast." I stayed still. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's happening." The man sighed, still smiling, but there was something behind his smile now, something I couldn't read. "I've already told you, son. I'm your dad. Now, let's eat before your food gets cold." My thoughts raced. Something was definitely wrong, but my stomach rumbled, betraying me. I was starving. Slowly, I slid out of bed and followed him into the hall. The cabin stretched out before me, rows of identical wooden doors lining the walls. We reached a staircase leading to a large entryway. Above us hung a giant chandelier made of antlers, casting long shadows across the red carpet below. The smell of cinnamon wafted in the air. We passed through double doors into a wide room that looked like a strange market. Glass vials were lined up neatly on a long counter, filled with liquids in shifting colors, starting from a deep brown and changing into bright hues as they moved along. I wanted to ask what they were, but something in my gut made me hold my tongue. We walked on until we reached what looked like a diner, with wooden booths along the walls and tables scattered throughout. The smell of warm syrup and French toast filled the room. The moment we entered, everything went silent. Everyone, men, women, and children, turned to look at us in perfect unison. Their faces were blank. Then, all together, they said, "Good morning, Dad." Just as suddenly, they all went back to their meals, as if nothing had happened. My stomach twisted with a sick feeling. The man led me to an empty table and sat across from me. A woman soon appeared, carrying 2 plates. She was older than him, with deep lines on her face, and her curly blonde hair was pulled into a loose bun. She set down our breakfast, scrambled eggs and golden French toast, and poured me a glass of orange juice. "Orange juice, like always," she said, smiling before turning to the man. "How did she know I liked orange juice?" My mind was spinning, almost as much as my stomach was growling. "Coffee, Dad?" she asked, her voice sweet but flat. "Black, as usual," the man replied, cutting into his food. I reached for my fork, desperate to eat and distract myself from the unease in my chest, But before I could take a bite, his hand shot out and stopped me. Ah. Not yet, Elliot. His fingers gripped my wrist firmly. You haven't said good morning to Dad yet. His voice was light, but his grip was strong. Too strong. His blue eyes locked with mine. I hesitated, my stomach turning with hunger and discomfort. I swallowed hard. Good morning, Dad. His grip relaxed, and he smiled wide. That's my boy. He went back to eating. Good children listen to their dads. I gripped my fork tightly, forcing myself to eat even though I wasn't hungry anymore. After a few bites, I couldn't hold it in anymore. You're not my father. His smile didn't fade, but he stopped chewing. He tilted his head, like he hadn't quite heard me. What was that? I swallowed and said it louder. You're not my father. My father works on a ship. He's a mechanic. He's the kindest man you'll ever meet. The man sighed and shook his head. I don't know what you're talking about, Elliot. His voice remained gentle, but now there was an edge to it. You're still confused. You're having a hard time figuring out what's real and what's just a dream. My fork trembled in my hand. My pulse was thundering in my ears. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know who these people were. And I wasn't sure I had ever known them at all. I ate in silence, forcing each bite past a lump in my throat. The food was good, perfect even, but there was something strange about it. Each flavor felt exaggerated, like a memory of breakfast, not the real thing. The man across from me, Dad, ate without a word, his demeanor completely unbothered, as if my outburst never happened. The woman, Mom, moved around the dining hall, tending to others with that same soft, practiced smile. The people at the tables murmured quietly to each other, the occasional laughter breaking the stillness of the room. I kept my head down, not wanting to meet anyone's eyes. Then, from the corner of my vision, I noticed them. 2 children were sitting at a booth near the far wall, watching me. A thin, dark-skinned girl with braided hair and hollow cheeks, and beside her, a pale, bald boy with soft features and wide, glassy eyes. They looked younger than me, maybe 10 or 11, but something about them felt old. Where our eyes met, they quickly looked away, going back to their food, shoveling it into their mouths like it was nothing. I quickly looked away too. Once breakfast was over, Dad clapped his hands together. All right, kiddo. Let's get you back to bed. You've had a rough morning. Why don't you head to your room and rest for a bit? I'll have Mom check on you once we're done cleaning up. He stood, gathered our plates, and took them to the kitchen, leaving me sitting there alone. I didn't know what to do. Should I try to run to the front door and leave? What were those vials? Should I ask someone, anyone, what was happening? My mind spun in 1,000 directions, each question leading to another. But despite everything, something deep inside me told me to listen to Dad. I stood up and walked through the dining hall, back into the main hallway. People greeted me as I passed, saying good morning, Elliot, but I ignored them, my focus on getting back upstairs, back to my room. The scent of pine and damp cloth lingered in the air, now it felt strangely familiar, almost nostalgic. When I reached my room, it was exactly as I had left it. The walk back had felt so natural, as if I'd done it 100 times before. I sat down, inhaling the familiar scent of the room, but something itched at the edge of my mind. I turned to the window and froze. Outside, beyond the glass, stretched an endless ocean. A vast, rolling sea, sparkling under a perfect blue sky. My stomach lurched. The ship. My family. My real family. My friends. How had I forgotten them? How had I let them slip away so easily? I gripped the windowsill, my breath coming in shallow, frantic gasps. I thought about climbing through the window, running across the grass, toward the sand, and into the water. Maybe if I reached the ocean, I'd remember everything. Maybe I'd wake up. But I stayed. I stayed, trapped in a body that didn't feel like mine. My mind spiraled further, out of control. I crawled back into bed and buried my face in the pillows, sobbing until my chest ached, until I felt empty. A soft knock at the door startled me. Elliot? A woman's voice. I wiped my face and swallowed the lump in my throat. Come in. The woman from the dining hall entered. Mom. Oh, baby, what's the matter? She asked, a concerned look spreading across her face as she hurried over and knelt beside my bed. I'm just so confused, I choked out through sobs. I don't know what's real or what's not, or what's happening. I don't know you. I covered my face with my hands, shaking. She wrapped her arms around me, pulling me close. Her warmth seeped into my skin, comforting me. Oh, sweetheart, she cooed, stroking my hair. Of course you know who I am. I'm your mom, honey. I clung to her, my sobs quieting, my breathing slowing. You just had a bad dream, baby, she murmured, rocking me gently. It's all over now. Mommy's here. She held me for what felt like a long time, until my trembling stopped and my mind felt lighter, as if she had smoothed over the edges of my thoughts. Sorry, Mom, I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. It's okay, sweetie. Dreams can be scary. But you're here now. You're home now, with your family. She smiled and rubbed my back. Why don't you rest a bit? Put on a movie. She stood up and walked to the TV in the corner of the room, turning it on. Pick something you like, she said. You can come down for lunch whenever you're ready. Lunch? I asked, confused. But we just ate breakfast. She chuckled softly. Elliot, you've been up here for hours. Don't be silly. A cold emptiness swept over me at her words. Hours? I swear I had just gotten up here. Get some rest now, honey, you look exhausted. Her voice was warm as she quietly closed the door behind her. I pushed the worry aside, lifting myself up from the bed. I walked over to the cabinet under the TV and opened it, pulling out a box of DVDs. Inside were all the classics, Terminator 2, Rambo, Predator, Back to the Future 1 and 3, everything I loved. My fingers hovered over the cases. How did they know? How did they know these were my favorites? I picked The Return of Godzilla and tossed it into the DVD player. Settling back into bed, I let the movie play. As the opening credits rolled, the familiar grainy sequence filled the screen. The low hum of the soundtrack vibrated through the room, grounding me to something real, something that felt like mine. I pulled the blanket over my shoulders and watched the film, but my mind drifted. How did they know? How did they know these were my favorites? How did they know I always skipped Back to the Future too? I tried to shake the thought and focus on the film, but then I saw it, the ocean. The submarine. A deep unease stirred inside me, something beyond the movie. The ocean. The ship. My father. My real father. The air in the room felt heavier, as if the walls were slowly closing in. I gripped the blanket tighter, trying to steady my nerves. Then, I heard it. A soft creak. Not from the movie, but from inside the room. Slowly, I turned my head toward the door. It was open, just a crack. Two figures stood there, small and unmoving. The thin girl, her face expressionless, stood beside the pale, bald boy from the diner. They didn't say a word. They just watched. I shivered, discomfort crawling up my spine. Can I help you? I whispered, my voice barely a sound. The girl tilted her head slightly, the boy blinked, his face unreadable. Then, in perfect unison, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the dimly lit hallway. My heart hammered in my chest. I should stay in my room. I should stay safe. But something deep inside me refused. I threw off the blanket, climbed out of bed, and cautiously moved toward the door. The hallway was quiet, the scent of old wood more pronounced than before. The warm glow of the wall lights flickered softly, like candles in a draft. I peeked out, my eyes scanning the hall. The two children were just ahead, turning a corner. Without thinking, I followed. My bare feet sank into the plush carpet as I stepped into the hallway. The air was still, the only sound being the faint hum of the TV behind me, muffled as I gently shut the door. I quickened my pace, careful to stay quiet. As I rounded the bend, I saw them standing at the far end of the hall, in front of a door. It looked like any other room in the cabin, yet just staring at it made my skin crawl. The girl pressed her small hand against the knob, but didn't turn it. The boy stood beside her, staring at the wood as though he could see through it. I stopped, keeping my distance. "Why are you watching me?" I asked, my voice anxious. "What's in there?" They didn't react right away. Then, the girl turned her head, glancing at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were dark and deep, holding no malice, just curiosity. "You don't remember?" she asked, her voice quiet, unsettling. The boy finally turned to face me. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice flat. "I live here," I muttered, though the words felt wrong coming from my mouth. The girl smiled slightly. "Do you?" I didn't know how to respond. The boy took a step forward. "Go back to your room, Elliot." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a command. It was a statement, an undeniable certainty. I wanted to listen. I should listen. But my eyes flickered back to the door. Something inside me screamed that I needed to know what was behind it. I swallowed hard. "What's in there?" I asked again. The girl turned fully toward me, her eyes still locked onto mine. "You already asked that." I hesitated, then took a step closer. "And you didn't answer." The boy frowned, glancing at me before looking back at the girl. "He's not ready." My fingers twitched, and before I could say another word, the girl reached for the knob and turned it. "Elliot." A voice cut through the silence. I spun around. Dad stood at the other end of the hallway, his expression calm but firm, defiant. "Get away from there." I froze. The girl and boy didn't move. They didn't even look at him. Dad took a step closer, his smile tight, almost forced. "Now, son." I looked back at the door. "Elliot, get over here now." His voice rang out, commanding, harsh. The words hit me like a slap. For a moment, I froze, caught between the pull of the door and the urgency in Dad's voice. The door seemed to pulse with something I couldn't understand. But Dad's voice sliced through the haze in my mind. I turned fully to face him. His eyes locked with mine, and his smile shifted, no longer kind, now cold and tense. The urge to move toward the door fought against the fear creeping up my spine. I steadied myself, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety in my chest. "What's behind that door?" I asked, my voice trembling with frustration and fear. Dad's jaw clenched. "Don't ask about things you don't understand, Elliot." He took another step forward, his presence filling the hallway, forcing the air to thicken. The narrow space felt smaller, suffocating, but the door. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The girl's voice, soft and distant, broke the silence. "You'll forget," she said quietly. "You'll forget everything." The boy's voice was flat, unfeeling. "You're not ready to remember." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean, not ready?" The words spilled out before I could stop them. Dad stepped forward again, his hand outstretched as though trying to reassure me, but it only made me feel smaller. "Come with me, Elliot," he said, his voice softer but still insistent. "Let's get you back to your room." I glanced at the door once more. There was something there, something I couldn't name. I felt it in my bones, like a whisper just out of reach. With a final, lingering glance at the children, whose expressions hadn't changed in the slightest, I turned toward Dad. We moved back down the hall. The air was still heavy, less suffocating but still thick with tension. As we reached the top of the stairs, Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't need to know everything right now," he said quietly, his voice low and firm. "Everything will make sense when the time is right." I nodded, but my mind was racing. What wasn't I ready to understand? What were those two children? What was behind that door? "Who are they, Dad?" I asked, following him back to my room. "Anthozoa and Arenaceous?" Dad asked, sounding a little surprised I didn't know. "Your brother and sister, of course. Those two are always getting into trouble." He shook his head with a smile. "I'll see to it they get a stern talking to." I didn't say anything else as I followed him down the hall. Something didn't sit right about the way he spoke about them. Brother and sister? They didn't look anything like me, not even close. But Dad's words lingered in my mind, and I pushed the confusion aside. They're family, I told myself. Days turned into weeks, then months. I lost track of time. It felt like it was slipping through my fingers, like sand running away in the wind. The mornings blurred together, one breakfast after another, the same routine, the same faces. At some point, I stopped trying to keep track. I woke up, ate, watched TV or read. I didn't leave my room much anymore. No one really came to check on me. Mom, Dad, and the other adults were busy with something. I wasn't sure what. I spent time with my siblings in the glass breaking room, smashing vials and flasks with hammers. We'd play video games, build puzzles, and do other simple activities. I tried to remember bits and pieces of my life before, faces, places, fragments of memories. But the harder I tried, the foggier everything became. Why did it feel like there was something I was supposed to know? My old life seemed so distant, like a dream I couldn't quite recall. But when I thought about it, I realized I didn't have an old life. This was my life now. I'd occasionally see Anthozoa and Erinaceus. Every time I did, it made my stomach drop. I never spent much time with them. They made me uneasy. They were always together, always smiling those odd, unshifting smiles. They seemed different somehow, like they were waiting for something, like they knew something I didn't. I never went back to that room, the one that felt so wrong. Dad knew best. If I wasn't meant to go in there, then I wouldn't. The one thing that always bothered me was going to the bathroom. It was on the first floor, down the hall in the opposite direction of the diner. It was like any other bathroom in a lodge, but the exterior wall was made entirely of glass. The view outside showed the peninsula, with the ocean stretching out on all sides. The land arced off into the distance, lush and green, surrounded by sandy beaches and crystal-clear water. It never rained. It never stormed. Storms, the sea. I hated the sea. Just looking out the window made me feel like something was wrong, like something was pressing down on me. It made me ache in a way I couldn't explain. There were other lodges across the green. I would sometimes see figures moving outside, but I never went outside myself. It wasn't that I couldn't, I knew my siblings went swimming often, but the thought of leaving, just the thought made my chest tighten. I wanted to shrink away, to cry. I was okay staying inside. One afternoon, after what felt like years of routine, Dad finally came to see me. "Elliot, we've got something new for you to learn," he said, his voice calm, though there was an edge to it now. "It's time for you to start learning how we make the vials." I had seen the vials before, rows and rows of them, lined up in the strange market booth-like area. But I hadn't paid them much attention until now. Curiosity stirred inside me. I followed Dad down the same hallway I'd walked through so many times, but this time, I was hyper-aware of every creak of the floor beneath us, every step feeling heavier than the last. We entered the central room beyond the lobby, where the vials were stored. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of something I couldn't quite place. In the center of the room stood the station, covered with vials neatly arranged in rows. Some were empty, while others were half-filled with liquids of various colors that shimmered in the low light. "This is where it all happens," Dad said, his voice low, almost reverent. He motioned for me to come closer. "You'll learn to make them yourself. The vials are important, Elliot. You'll understand why soon enough." I stood there, my mind a whirl of confusion and curiosity, but also a deep, unsettling feeling. Something was wrong about all of this. Something didn't feel right. Dad handed me a small vial, its contents a murky brown liquid. "This, my son, is what you don't want." He opened it and took a swig. "Delicious, but useless," he said, handing it to me. "Drink, don't be afraid." I held the vial in my trembling hands. The liquid was thick and flaky. I touched my lips to the edge of the vial and poured it into my mouth. It tasted sweet, like melted chocolate mixed with the best fruit you could imagine. "That is good," I said, smiling. He smiled back. "Why don't we drink these more often?" I asked, reaching for another from the shelf. Because, my child, that would be a waste. He motioned toward the rows of brightly colored vials. The liquid can be turned back into what we need, what we use. Let me show you. He took the brown vial from my hands and opened a cabinet beneath the station, revealing rows of small flasks. Pick one, he said, pointing to the array. I knelt down and studied the containers, each labeled with a different animal. I picked one that said duck. Good choice, he said as I stood. Now, pour that into the vial I'm holding, he instructed. I opened the flask, and as I did, a faint quack echoed from inside. I jumped slightly, and Dad chuckled. Don't be afraid. Now, pour. I carefully poured the flask into the vial. Pink smoke flowed into the vial, swirling with the brown liquid. As it mixed, it slowly transformed, turning into a bright pink, clear fluid, much like the smoke. Once the liquid was fully pink, I closed the flask and set it aside. Look at that, Dad said, a smile playing on his lips. You actually did it, he added, shaking his head. He swirled the vial, then placed it back on the shelf. I wasn't worried. I knew you were ready. I can always tell. Ready for what? I asked. To make vials, that's what. All you need to know is that you can do it now. You're not ready to know everything yet, child. Just trust your father. He gave me a hearty pat on the back as we walked out. I'm so proud of you, Elliot. You're making the whole family proud, he said, ruffling my hair. Now, I've got to get back to work, sport. He spoke as he walked away, leaving me standing there. I turned away from the room, heading toward the lobby, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. Dad's words still lingered in my mind, trust your father. He'd said it so many times before. Yet, this time, something about it felt different. This time, I wasn't so sure. As I passed through the grand entryway, I caught sight of Anthozoa and Irenaceus. They stood in the shadows of the stairwell, watching me. Their faces were expressionless, but there was something in the way they looked at me that made my stomach tighten. I tried to ignore them, but they didn't break eye contact. It unsettled me. As we locked eyes, a sharp pain suddenly sliced through my head. I grabbed my skull, my hands shaking as I tried to steady myself. A piercing ache pulsed through my brain, spreading quickly, like fire racing through my veins. My hands dug into my scalp, desperate for relief. I felt cold, my skin prickling as if I were submerged in icy water. My heart pounded, and the world around me began to distort. The walls of the hallway dissolved into mist, and suddenly, I wasn't in the house anymore. The sharp scent of salt water filled my nose. I looked around and realized the hall was gone, replaced by flashes of blinding lightning and the deafening crash of waves. I was on a ship. The sound was deafening. The wind howled, fierce and unrelenting, pushing against me. The rain pelted me like bullets, stinging my skin, the cold water soaking me to the bone. My clothes clung to me, heavy with the storm's weight. The ship creaked and groaned beneath me, the deck slick with water as I struggled to stay on my feet. My heart raced, my pulse hammering in my ears. I couldn't make sense of it. I was in the middle of a storm, but it felt too real. My legs gave way, and I collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air, clutching at the wetwood as though it could anchor me to something solid. The cold water covered me, and my chest tightened, each breath coming in sharp gasps. The storm was all-encompassing, the sound roaring in my ears, drowning everything out. I crumpled to the ground, shivering, unable to understand why I was there or what was happening. I wanted to scream, but the storm swallowed my voice. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything vanished. I was back. My chest heaved with each ragged breath as I lay on the cold floor of the hallway. The world felt off-kilter, like I'd just woken from a nightmare, but the sensation of the storm still clung to me. I blinked, struggling to steady myself. I looked up. Anthozoa and Irenaceus stood over me, their eyes cold and unblinking. The hallway around us was still, unchanged. But the air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't explain. My head throbbed. The pain was dull now, but the disorienting sensation lingered. My hand trembled as I reached up to touch my face, expecting to feel rainwater, but there was nothing. "Follow us, quickly, Elliot." Anthozoa's voice broke through the fog in my mind. I stared at her, unable to move for a moment. My mind felt fragmented, like pieces of it were still lost somewhere in the storm I had just experienced. My hand hovered in the air, trembling, the wetness on my skin gone, leaving only the sting of cold on my fingertips. Irenaeus didn't say a word. He stood there, his gaze steady and unwavering, like he was waiting for something. "Now, Elliot." Anthozoa's voice was sharper this time, urgent, pulling me from my paralysis. I stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady, my head still spinning from the vision. It felt like something was slipping from me, like I was losing parts of myself, pieces of who I was. I wanted to ask them what was happening, but the words caught in my throat. I was too afraid to speak, too afraid of what they might say or what might happen if I didn't do as they said. I followed them. Anthozoa and Irenaeus moved silently, gliding effortlessly across the floor. I could barely hear their steps as we ascended the central stairs, the creaks of the steps beneath our feet the only sound. I glanced behind me, my fear growing with every step, but the pressure of their presence pushed me forward. At the top of the stairs, we turned sharply to the left. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the door at the end of the hallway. A flash of memory flickered in my mind, and I realized this was the same room I had seen before, the one that had felt so wrong when I had first approached it. The air was cold, and the walls pulsed with a quiet, hidden menace. The door loomed ahead, and my feet felt as though they were sinking into the floor. Anthozoa and Irenaeus didn't wait for me to gather my thoughts. They simply opened the door, and with a gentle push, they ushered me inside. The room was an endless hallway, stretching far beyond my sight in both directions. The walls were lined with old arcade machines, each glowing with an unnatural light that cast long, shifting shadows across the space. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice trembling as I glanced back at the two children. Their cold eyes were fixed on me, unblinking and unfeeling. "Remember, Elliot," they spoke in unison, their voices a strange mix of desperation and command. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, hanging like a weight. "Remember," they repeated, louder this time. The urgency in their voices sent a shiver down my spine. It felt as if something important was slipping away from me, something that I couldn't grasp, no matter how hard I tried. "You must remember, Elliot," they said together. "Play," Irenaeus spoke, his finger pointing toward the nearest machine. A deep, gnawing fear coiled in my gut. I wanted to run, to turn and flee, but my body wouldn't obey. It felt as though the room itself was pulling me toward the machines. "I don't want to, please, can we leave?" My voice cracked as I pleaded, my heart pounding, my hands shaking at my sides. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back. "You must play, Elliot," Irenaeus repeated, his voice colder this time. "We're running out of time," Anthozoa spoke. She pointed toward the machine again, her gaze locked onto me, urging me, begging me, demanding me. "Play." I felt trapped. There was no way out. Slowly, I turned and walked toward the machine, each step dragging me closer to something I couldn't understand. As I neared it, the screen flickered, and the words "Hello, Elliot" appeared across the display in bold, cheerful letters. My heart raced in my chest as I stared at the screen. The image shifted. It was a beach, beautiful and serene, the sand stretching in all directions, the waves gently lapping at the shore. A message flashed across the screen, "Start." I sat there, my body trembling. I didn't want to do this, but I felt a force, something unseen but undeniable, pushing me forward. The screen seemed to pull me in, beckoning me to click the start button. My hand shook as I reached for it, and with a shaky breath, I pressed the button. The world around me blurred, the room fading into the distance as the game swallowed me whole. I found myself standing on a beach. The sky was dark, with no moon or stars above, casting everything in an inky blackness. The ocean lapped at the shore quietly and calmly, as though even the ocean knew it was night. On the shore, I saw 3 figures, small children. They stood motionless in the darkness, staring at me. I walked toward them slowly at first, my body moving with hesitation. Then, an inexplicable urgency took over. My pace quickened, and I found myself running, sprinting toward them, my heart pounding in my chest. The beach seemed to stretch infinitely as I ran, the shore pulling away with each step. My feet began to ache, and my legs grew heavier, but I couldn't stop. I kept running, the sound of my feet pounding against the sand echoing in my ears. The beach, endless and unyielding, stretched on before me. My breath quickened, and soon tears welled in my eyes. The wind picked up, howling through the night. The sky remained dark, but I could hear the distant rumblings of a storm. The waves crashed harder against the shore, and thunder boomed from some unseen place. I heard the sound of metal creaking, the ocean's water twisting into machines I couldn't see. My heart raced as I cried out, "Come back." My voice broke, "I can't lose you, please." The words hung in the air, distorted by the unnatural noise surrounding me. Then, I heard it. A voice. It was faint at first, barely a whisper, but it grew louder. "Elliot." The voice echoed in my ears, sharp and desperate. "Elliot." The voice screamed now. I turned around, my heart skipping a beat. There, standing at the edge of the beach where the sand met the grass, was Dad. The glow of the cabin behind him bathed him in soft light, casting long shadows across the ground. "Come back here right now, son." His voice was filled with strange intensity. "You should not be out here so late." I froze, the weight of his words pressing on me. The figures on the beach in the storm had disappeared, only Dad's voice remained, cutting through the chaos. He was real. He was here. "I've had enough of this foolishness, boy. Obedient children are good children." With that, he snapped his fingers, and suddenly, I was back in the lobby of the cabin. Dad stood next to me, wearing a long cloak that covered his face with a hood. In front of me, the inhabitants of the cabin stood in a massive circle around the outer edges of the lobby. Hundreds of cloaked figures, their robes hiding their faces, surrounded the room. The two staircases in the hall above were filled with people, turning the main entrance into an arena. "Come, child, it is time," he said firmly, leading me through the crowd of hooded figures. The heavy silence surrounded me as I walked, feeling their eyes on me, though I couldn't see their faces. As I broke through the crowd, I finally saw what they were encircling. In the center, lying on the red carpet, was Anthozoa. She lay crumpled on the floor, her face pale and sickly, her body trembling.